Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Drobo Broadcast Network. My name is Mario Blandini at Drobo, and today we're talking about business trends, a little departure from our normal solutions-oriented structure for this podcast, and to talk about the top initiatives and projects for storage in 2012, uniquely from a small business perspective, is special guest Brad O'Neill, who's CEO and founder of TechValidate. How you doing today, Brad?
Hey, Mario. Thanks for having me here. Great to be here.
Great. As we go to our abstract here, folks who are out doing research on the trends will typically find a lot of information about what technology means to enterprise-type customers. And that doesn't always necessarily fit small business requirements. And what Drobo did in conjunction with your organization, Brad, is did a survey targeted at small and medium business. And that allowed us to get some information. So I really appreciate you going through the results of that and what it might mean to folks that are looking at doing projects in 2012. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what TechValidate does.
Sure, yeah. Why don't we start there so we can have a context for your listeners here and understand what my company's role in this is. So TechValidate is a software-based platform, and what we do, Mario, is enable technology vendors primarily to gather data from their verified users and then publish what we refer to as reality-based marketing, generate content from all of that data that has come from the verified users. So what we're really focused on doing as an organization is removing hype from how tech companies go about positioning themselves and instead allow them to use real feedback from real customers to tell their stories or educate their communities of users. So we work with hundreds of thousands of end users on an annual basis. We gather data from some of the biggest names in tech all the way down to startups. That's what the company does.
Great. Well, virtualization is a big topic these days, no matter what size company you are. But having some actual reality versus virtual reality is kind of a cool thing. So as we get into the next slide, I know that you and I both did time at different storage service provider companies. And the virtualization as a technology would be something you wrote about a lot. So I think today I was at our event here in Singapore, a VMware partner exchange. So all across the globe, small organizations are doing virtualization. Do you see virtualization going to 100% in small organizations, or is it still the early days? What does your research show?
Well, going to 100%. I hesitate to think of any IT trend that I've seen in the past 20 years that's ever gone to 100%. There are always holdouts. That's an interesting way of phrasing it. Virtualization is, without a doubt, the single most important enabling technology development for IT infrastructures in this current generation. And, it's just interesting by way of background, Mario. You mentioned that you and I both worked at first-generation storage service providers back in the 90s. If we had virtualization then, those business models actually would have worked beautifully, right? But we didn't. We didn't have it for the web yet. But yeah, virtualization as a concept has existed. You go back into mainframes, and virtualization is a concept. So it's always there as an idea. You want to abstract out the ability to manipulate and control digital information from its physical infrastructure. And so in SMBs, just pulling it back in, yes, there's zero doubt in my mind that it will get to a very pervasive, ubiquitous state quite quickly, because you can't do a lot of the business processes that you want to do as an SMB without having virtualization available to you. It can't be done. The trick is how specific. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that according to the research that we did together, half of the respondents are deploying more storage specifically for server virtualization. So it would appear that it's definitely well crossed the chasm, so to speak, not to use too many marketing terms, but something that's very practical because there's cost savings involved and some operational efficiencies that help get to that utility model that was the goal back then before the technology really enabled it.
No, totally. And that's really still tip of the iceberg. I think part of your question was, is it early days? I think it is. The heavy lifting is done, and I think now is where it starts to actually get fun for if you're an SMB IT expert out there, the next 4 years will actually be a little bit more like a break, because now I think we're finally getting to the point where some more advanced solutions that are leveraging virtualization are starting to pop up in the marketplace, including what you folks are doing.
Right, and I know that Drobo's put a lot of effort into taking technology, which was more consumerization to start with, and bringing those capabilities into form factors and platforms that make SAN storage affordable so that you can take advantage of the features of virtualization, like live migration and mobility of the applications. So that's something that we've been receiving a lot of positive feedback on. So if SMBs out there looking at a SAN, their first one, or maybe expanding an existing one to do more virtualization, they're definitely normal. File servers also are something that's been around forever, and it seems that everyone's wanted to get rid of them, but maybe you really can't. Users still want access to their files. They want them close by. Cloud's a big thing there. Where do you see cloud playing in there? Because I think a lot of the hype is around using cloud for your files, but don't you need them close to you as well? How's that playing out?
Yeah, no, this is a fascinating topic, because I think we've all just lived through the great cloud hype cycle, and I think we're finally coming out of it. And it lasted a good long time, too, compared to a lot of hyped trends. This one had a good 2-3 year legs on it. But now, from just the SMB users that I talk to in the context of what we do for a living here and what I know from the industry, we're getting to the point where we realize that the cloud has its place. It can do some things really, really well. It offloads the cost of the infrastructure. It provides ease of access, certain simple collaboration environments. It provides great access there if you're doing file sharing. But you nailed it, Mario. What it is not a substitute for, when you get down to the speed of local access, the data privacy of local access, certain collaboration dynamics that you see in an SMB. Take something concrete like medical imaging or an architect's office, where you have large media files that need to be collaborated on by multiple users. You can't do that in the cloud because of bandwidth costs and constrictions and managing things like contention between different users. You want local storage to do that. That's something that is not ever going to change. But the trick is, how do you build local access to storage at the edge of the network that still provides seamless access to what you're doing in the cloud and being able to move them back and forth effectively. And I think when I talk about things getting fun now over the next few years, that's one of the areas where I think there's just some real cool intelligence starting to pop up to make that easier. But local storage is, I might be a bigot on this, but I don't ever see it going away. So
yeah, and we at Drobo, we make local storage, so
yeah, you don't want to see it go away either.
Well, but it's really it's not a binary thing, winners losers. It's really a combination of technologies in the end that always provide benefit to the customer. In the case of disk-based backup, it's another technology that's cloud-oriented, and Drobo has a solution with Amazon Web Services leveraging their AWS storage gateway. That's a great blend of on-site disk-based backup and then backup off-site to the cloud to get you your 3-2-1, 3 copies on 2 different media, 1 off-site. We've done a lot of episodes on our podcast series, Brad, around disk-based backup. Why is it now that you think more smaller organizations are starting to do it? Is it because they're going away from tape, which has its limitations, or really did they just never have good backup? They're just now getting into it. What do you think the color is around why that's becoming increasingly popular?
Well, I think it's probably both. I don't see those as mutually exclusive. I know from when I was an industry analyst, when you would talk to folks, some folks, tape was perfectly adequate. And for many organizations, I'm sure some of your listeners, it is still totally adequate. It really comes down to there are just some very distinct advantages that come out of having a disk-based copy of data. And you can't drive around that fact. You can do certain things that you simply can't do easily from a tape-based backup. Obviously, creating multiple copies in multiple locations is one thing, but using that copy for snapshotting and recovery purposes instantly to do continuous data protection, they're just things that are impossible with tape. So why are folks moving to it now? Probably a combination of cost-effective solutions that are coming bundled that reduce complexity from vendors like yourselves, and also the realization that, here I am. I'm responsible for the entire data protection schema at my company, and I really do want to start taking advantage of having offsite copy for the first time. I do want to protect our business's data in multiple locations, and I might want to leverage a cloud-based infrastructure for that. It's much easier to do that with disk.
And I think that folks looking at architectures that support virtualization also give them the enabling infrastructure. In other words, SAN-based storage that can be used not just for your virtual machines, but can be used for disk-based backup just the same. And that's just providing more ability for folks to do solutions that meet a better service level compared to tape. I worked back in the mainframe days too, and know that it has its place. And we still think tape's great for certain monthly folds that you may want to have for archiving purposes. Disk-based replication tends to perfectly replicate corrupted data between two sides. So it's not an or solution, it's more of an and solution. Let's talk a little bit about something I was surprised to find in the research study. And just to reiterate, folks, the source of all this data was a 2012 TechValidate project that we did on Drobo SAN storage in 2 phases. Not as strong in terms of generating data is email and database. Less than 20% of the SMBs are deploying storage here. Do you think this is an area where cloud's actually having an impact? I know that Drobo uses for our CRM, Salesforce.com. That's cloud. Are things like web-based email and CRM things that are more practical for smaller businesses versus more cumbersome in-house or on-premises type solutions?
Yeah, if I would just try to interpret this particular piece of data, I'd agree with you 100%. That's where I would take the conclusion. I know, just speaking from anecdotally from my company, TechValidate, we leverage aggressively, cloud-based providers. I mean, we are one ourselves, so it would be crazy if we didn't, but we're a Salesforce shop. We use a web-based email provider too. That normally, historically, would have been local data. For us, we talked earlier about some data is really important to have local, some you don't really care if it's local or not. For us, that kind of data providing it in the cloud is superior to having it local. There may well be organizations for any number of reasons, regulatory or just privacy and security issues, where they would want to keep that local as well. But I think the trend line is exactly what you just said, Mario, that comparatively speaking to other data loads that you would want to store, that email and CRM is on the decline because there are such great solutions that just fork it over to somebody else's infrastructure now.
Well, we at Drobo use Drobos for our Exchange storage. We have an unfair advantage of having great access to storage for that purpose. But we are, for CRM, it makes sense for us to use cloud, and we're, a small business by most measures, right around 100 employees. So that's something that's interesting. We're now on some of the trends here around top purchasing drivers. And I probably would have guessed this to be the result. Complexity was the number one driver that we found in the research here as to why folks are choosing the storage that they need for their particular applications in the small business. So it might seem like a rhetorical question, but why is it you think complexity is the top driver over all these other ones for SMBs?
Well, anyone who's spent any time with IT professionals in the SMB sector knows that it's one of the toughest jobs in the world because you have so many different things going on. You're responsible. It's really the last remaining job in IT where you are responsible potentially for everything. And so I think SMB buyers have always been a really good bellwether for helping IT vendors like yourselves also figure out where can you reduce a little bit of complexity and provide a huge benefit to the user. They're very sensitive to complexity and tools that can provide a reduction in that complexity, simplification. And I think part of the reason Drobo has been so successful is because the company has, we'll talk about this I'm sure a little bit later, but just what you've done with Beyond RAID is in and of itself a huge simplification. So your buyers are probably very finely primed already to be sensitive to complexity, which is part of the reason why they've become your customers. So I'm not shocked at all to see that came through as well. SMB IT management covers many domains, and if you're sensitive to it, I would assume that Drobo users, as they've indicated, would say that's part of the reason why I bought this, the number one reason.
Well, as busy as everyone is these days, time really is the thing that's scarce in most people's infrastructure. It's certainly not CPU and memory. People are virtualizing to take advantage of all that abundant resource there, but time's something I think that folks are always looking to get back, and complexity helps there. In terms of the next big thing, consolidation was the next thing that showed in the results, but then supporting business growth. As a former IT person myself, the last thing you want to do is implement something that you have to then quickly go back to management to get approval to expand and get something bigger because you outgrew it too quickly. So folks are definitely hesitant to do that. The whole idea of growth with technologies like deduplication something people are still concerned with, or does deduplication just help us stem the tide a little bit and maybe reduce the growth? It's just inherently there. Data is going to continue to grow, right?
Yeah, and the one thing that's always been reliable about the data storage industry, that it's like clockwork. If you look at the historical growth rates in data, it just is this smooth climb up every year. And it doesn't matter. It makes you realize, wow, what if we hadn't aggressively adopted data deduplication? Where would we be? Dedupe is obviously very important to a number of your users, I'm sure. But managing those growth expectations. The other thing that I think is probably why Drobo users, if I'm just, again, glancing at this data, knowing what I know about Drobo, knowing what I know about your users, you provide a very granular level of control for growth to your users, given the architecture of the devices. So if I'm an SMB IT pro and I'm looking at a Drobo, I realize, okay, I've just bought myself a very specific way to really take into my own hands, without expending a huge amount of budget, control over how I want to scale this part of my storage infrastructure. So being able to plan ahead and having flexibility about, at what increments you want to scale capacity, for example, super important. So that's how I interpret that.
And we have thin provisioning built into all Drobos and the ability to instantly expand, putting any capacity hard drive into the system. So that's something I think people really like, because it gives them the sense of security. They can quickly grow if they didn't get their capacity planning quite perfect. And I imagine back when you were doing storage service provider, you probably never procured the exact amount of storage you needed at the right time. It's always more of an art than a science. So that's something that folks really like. Yeah.
Hey, if you recall, it was an art, Mario, that required human beings actually going into a data center as well. So luckily we're past all of that.
Indeed. All right. Hey, as we go to the next slide, no one gets fired for buying brand name equipment. So do you think that storage technology has matured to a point, though, that where it doesn't need to be a single vendor? Folks in the past would really want to standardize on one storage platform. But now that there's new technology that makes it a lot easier to use and at the right price point, users can choose the right technology to fit their specific application. So do you see this trend continuing, that you can mix new technologies and kind of the classic name brands together to get the right mix for an SMB?
Yeah, this is a trend that I think we've all seen in enterprise IT for well over a decade now, the trend towards heterogeneous deployments for a number of reasons, both business reasons, but because it's now technologically enabled and easy for someone to go build a heterogeneous environment like this. That's great news for companies like Drobo that come along with a very disruptive innovation around something like Beyond Rate, which makes it then very easy, just based on criterion, for an SMB buyer to say, okay, that's a really cool new product. I think I'd like to add that level of differentiation, that capability into my product mix. I can go do that. And so you guys keep very competitive, well-known company from the other companies that folks look at and or deploy alongside Drobo. And I think that's completely typical. And we see that a lot from other companies that we at TechValidate work with that are emerging vendors who are going into an established space. They're residing often now alongside very well-known companies. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. But if you're going to pull that off, you better have a very differentiated capability like Drobo does.
Yep, and 83% of folks said that Beyond Rate was important or extremely important for them. And, TechValidate is a small company, so while you have tons of tech experts over there, I imagine you guys want to do it easy just the same, so you guys can do what you do best.
Yeah, totally. And we actually do have, in the building where our headquarters is, we do have Drobos. So we are happy customers. And if you asked the people, in our building why they bought it, I'm sure the answer would be same thing here, that just the simplicity that came out of Beyond, right? And what that meant for their management, and then the ease of sharing.
So as we go to the next slide, maybe you can talk a little bit, Brad, about consumerization. It's definitely a trend. It's playing a role in OpEx and CapEx in IT. I think there's a lot of folks that are going to bring your own cell phone and bring your own tablet versus the company providing those things. So this trend is continuing here. Really, OpEx and CapEx are always things that people are going to be sensitive to. How is consumerization playing a role there?
Well, I know this causes a ton of heartache for CIOs. I'm friends with several CIOs who, the bane of their existence are folks walking in now with iPads because they can't control them as easily as they could before. So that's the downside, is there might be a giving up of control that especially folks who've been IT professionals for a number of years don't like to do that for obvious reasons. The benefit that can come out of this, though, is, again, you can start to reduce some of the expenditure, because what we're really talking about in consumerization is empowerment. What we're really saying is that a new generation of devices have become so powerful and capable that an individual employee can purchase them themselves and then put them to work as a resource for the company. And that's a great thing. The trade-off is happy for the employee because they have personal control over this device and they like it. The trade-off for the company, though, is now it's an offloading from traditionally proprietary resources onto these mobile devices that have come into the organization. The trick then is, talking about the expenditure, how do you put controls in place so that you're understanding where your OpEx is actually shifting over to consumerized devices, and where, from a CapEx standpoint, how do you spend money effectively to enable employees, maybe buying them on their behalf, so that you can have programs. So I see a lot of companies are actually going through now finally structured consumerization projects where they're actually, they realize the reality, they're building programs for employees so that they are bringing in these devices. You're able to actually leverage virtualization in a lot of cases too to help ease this whole process for control.
Well, new technology is certainly a lever, and we're really happy to work with your firm on this project, Brad, because these are not numbers that Drobo came up with. These are the reality-based voice of the customer type of data points that really crystallize what it means around OpEx and CapEx, because you don't take on the concept of adding new things to your environment unless there is going to be some benefit there. So I was really happy to see these results come out. As we go to the next slide, we have a couple of tech facts here from the survey. There's actually dozens of them from companies in just about every category. I pulled a few of them that we would really consider to be classic small businesses. Do you think the comments here around cost savings are a sign of the economic environment, or from an SMB perspective, are they indicative of the ongoing need to spend efficiently?
Again, those things probably are playing into each other, the two sides of the same coin. One, just as a side comment, I was talking to one of my support reps who actually works with Drobo, ahead of getting on this call, and she commented to me that Drobo users have some of the most spunky comments that we get out of all of the companies that we work with. So it's funny, and you can see actually, you put some of them up here, Mario, pretty representative. You've got this great, very high personality user base that seems to be very involved in wanting to participate, which is awesome. Back to your specific question, I think everyone's always looking to save as much money as possible, but you're not going to save money when you're making an IT purchase at the exclusion of capability. So if you have delivered, a solid SAN alternative, then you're going to obviously be able to reap the rewards of that economically by getting that customer. But at the same time, they wouldn't have made that decision if it didn't line up with the criteria they needed. So I think what you're seeing here is just Drobo's in that magic zone where it provides the right economic value. People are always looking at that cost-benefit trade-off, and you're riding that curve nicely. And it's great to see color commentary from customers that actually put their own words out there to show. And just to explain, by the way, just for people who are watching this, one of the things that TechValidate does is we enable a user of a technology, like in this case Drobo, to provide publicly anonymized content like this. So this is exactly what these Drobo users said, and then they're able to turn it into a quote that can then be shared publicly. They don't have to show their name or the name of their company to do that.
And I don't think it's important to have that level of specificity because we can see here clearly the size of the company and what it meant for their particular industry and what it meant for them. As we go to the next slide, there's a couple other industries here that, if you think about it, they're really not small businesses. They're populations in the hundreds that would not be considered a small organization, but based on the way they operate a lot like a small business. They have a limited IT staff, probably limited budgets, and they're limited in really being able to choose enterprise storage. Do you think organizations like higher education, local government, as well as healthcare will continue to look at IT differently than commercial would have the same number of employees?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That's historically been the case. I know just from what I see from other technology companies besides Drobo, when we see results come in from those folks, same thing. There are unique requirements that these verticals that you have mentioned here, government, education, healthcare, have always had, they continue to have, and I can't imagine, because they have unique workflows and they have budgetary requirements and purchasing restrictions, they will in the future as well. So it's great to see that you folks have actually been able to make such strong inroads with these verticals.
Well, we market to the small business horizontal mostly, and as we go to the next slide, you'll see the types of solutions that Drobo puts together. Naturally, storage, it's one of these things that you need, but it doesn't exist in isolation. It's there supporting a larger application, and when you talk to customers, at least when I'm talking to them on a daily basis, they don't think of buying storage for the sake of buying storage. They have a project going on. They're implementing DR. They're implementing disk-based backup. They're virtualizing more. And what this slide shows you are several different diagrams of how you can put a blueprint together using Drobo technology to, at a very small level, put together the basic building blocks so that the same applications that an enterprise customer might be running can be implemented on a smaller scale, empowered by Drobo SAN storage, whether it's cloud backup even. I mentioned the Amazon Web Services solution using S3 with their new virtual appliance there. Drobo does this type of testing, so it's more than just the product. It's putting the solutions together with the how-to guides and the documents that give that time-constrained IT person the information that they need. So I don't even need to ask you, Brad. Folks will continue to buy storage not for the sake of storage. They're buying it to support one of the initiatives in their company, and these initiatives will continue to grow throughout 2012.
And this is a nice slide, Mario, because I think this is a visual representation of that complexity point that we talked about at the top of this call. People want to reduce complexity, and look at these four very iconic projects that go on in an SMB are represented here visually, and you've got one architecture that enables you to hit multiple of them if you need to. That itself, that's the reduction of complexity that we're talking about, amongst other things.
Cool. Hey, well, let's go to this last slide. I wanted to tee up a couple questions here that talk to some initiatives that didn't necessarily come out in the research, but while I had you on the program, Brad, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit there around what's going on in SMB IT before we go ahead and wrap it up here. Cloud. In 30 seconds or less, if you have your crystal ball, where are we next year in this year in 2012 and next year in 2013 from a small business perspective?
Well, I think it's going to be an increase of the heterogeneous deployments that we've seen where people are getting more sophisticated about how they're using cloud, for example, like for backup and replication, having it as a target. But I also think you're going to see a lot of folks picking cloud-based applications where traditionally they might have used something local, and in some cases they'll be moving things local that they would have experimented with having in the cloud. So I think it'll be a mixed bag. So what's going to be important, though, is that you're going to have local storage, and you're going to have cloud access, and there's going to be a mix and a scale. You've written here private and public. Both are obviously going to continue to play roles. Probably a lot more private cloud showing up in the future as sophistication around different technologies come into place there. I think private cloud and SMBs probably more nascent. I could be wrong. But that's my 30-second answer.
Well, but the smaller the organization, I find, Brad, the more they want to hold on to their stuff. The large organizations have more lawyers, they have more managers that can make sure that public meets all of their needs. I think folks just intrinsically feel if they can point to where the data is, that they have more control over it. I think that they can still get a lot of the economics and then efficiencies of cloud using technologies and pay for it on a monthly basis versus having it as a upfront cost, but still do it from an SMB's viewpoint. So we'll continue to develop solutions at Drobo around that. Look forward to us doing some things there. As we go to wrap it up, folks, enterprise users, they have dedicated specialty teams. If you're listening to this broadcast, odds are you're not an enterprise and you've got 15 different hats that you're wearing, from mobile phones to firewalls to copiers to projectors to all the stuff in IT. So SMB folks don't have those types of staffs, and the reality is they do see IT infrastructure differently. So we wanted to share the results of our survey with TechValidate here, and hopefully that gave you some good information about the types of projects that other companies like you are doing here in 2012. Drobo is a great fit for virtualization and data protection, and we create an architecture that makes it feasible, both budget and complexity, in a smaller IT environment. We have a question here from the internet that talks about whether or not we have the plans to integrate block-level transportation from Drobo to an online service such as Amazon S3. And to answer that, we currently have a solution in partnership with Amazon Web Services that leverages their virtual appliance, which they call the AWS Storage Gateway. This is a virtual appliance you can install in VMware. It doesn't have to run on the paid-for version. You can run on the free version of VMware. It sits in your data center and will take data that is destined to go to the Drobo and also sync that up to the Amazon S3 cloud. So it's less of a cloud-based storage for primary and more, in the use case of a Drobo, the ability to get that off-site backup copy at a location that you may not have. If you're a small business, maybe you have one location. Brad, how many offices do you have over at TechValidate?
We've got 2 offices.
All right, so you have the ability to replicate between 2. A lot of small companies don't. And if you don't, hey, the Amazon S3 could be a great way to put a copy up there. Or in the case of the way the solution works, it's about $200 per month to protect 500 gig. And it might be that you just add extra protection for some of your data that you want up there in the cloud and have the ability to recover both locally and in the cloud if you want to. So do look for Drobo to continue with solutions like the one we've done with Amazon S3, because as we mentioned here, it's not really an or discussion, one versus the other. It's an and as folks put those sort of technologies together. Hey, as we go to the last slide, Brad, thanks a lot for joining us today on the program. I appreciate you taking time and giving us some of your insights around the results that we did from the survey. And for folks that are out there, they can go to the URL that we listed there to find more details about the results of the survey and get more quotes from customers like yourselves on the experiences they've had with a Drobo. Thanks again, Brad. I appreciate you spending time with us today.
Absolutely, Mario. Thank you.
All right, that wraps it up for this week, folks. And tune in next time to the Drobo Broadcast Network. We'll bring you more solutions designed for SMB IT and how storage can help you with those projects in 2012 and beyond. Thanks again for listening, folks. See you next time.